Hello, and welcome to Telefunkian. Today, we're going to be taking a look at a Roland TR-606 drum machine, and in particular, we're going to be taking a look at those pesky switches. Today's video is really quite short, more of a public service announcement than anything. This is in part because I've recently purchased replacement switches for a TR-606 from a well-known vendor, and then found that the replacement switches that were provided to me actually didn't fit the instrument. So, in an effort to help others and help you avoid making the same mistake I did, I'm sharing some inside information on where you can get these switches, the correct switches that will actually fit your instrument, and at a much reduced price compared to some of the other options that might be available to you. Both the Roland TR-606 and its sibling, the TB303, are famous for their temperamental switches. These switches seem to work as if they have a built-in stress sensor. As long as you're not doing anything important, they work just fine. But when you're performing live, or maybe trying to record an important session in a studio with friends or bandmates, that's when the switches start getting temperamental. You press them, they don't turn on. You press them, they don't turn off. You press a switch once, and it triggers 2 or 3 times. Ultimately, this really affects your ability to use the instrument and enjoy playing it. So what can be done? Well, we can either attempt to repair or clean these switches, or we can replace them. Unfortunately, the momentary switches in the TR-606 and the 303 don't really lend themselves to disassembly and repair like some larger switches might. However, we can clean them, and we'll show you how in this video. As well, you can replace them with brand new ones, which are still readily available and not too terribly expensive, assuming you get them from the right vendor. In the TR-606, there are 20 tactile switches. These are manufactured by Alps, and the part number is SKHCBEA010. You can find these switches at Mauser and various other suppliers. All you really need to attempt a repair of a finicky switch is a screwdriver and some contact cleaner. However, if you'd like to replace your switches, you're going to need that screwdriver, a soldering iron, and a little bit of skill. If you don't think that you have the soldering skill required to attempt this type of repair, don't try. Instead, either work with a friend or take your instrument to a reputable technician who will be able to undertake this repair on your behalf. In this video, we're going to assume that you know how to disassemble the 606. If you need help with that, please see one of my other videos on the instrument. Let's get started. These switches are notorious for becoming temperamental, and that's in part a result of their design, which tends to, over time, trap a certain amount of debris that will get into the switch, but also maybe it's influenced by corrosion that occurs over time. And I want to show you what these switches are made of. In order to clean these switches, the first thing I've done is remove the switch covers, and to refresh your recollection, this is what they look like. They simply press down on the switches and are friction fit. In order to remove them, what I do is I put a set of tweezers like so underneath the switch cap and gently pry it up. And what this does is it allows leverage against the body of the switch actuator, so that you're not so you're leveraging against that rather than ripping this right out, which is actually what happened in this case. The switch actuator ripped right out of the housing. But this gives us an opportunity to examine the switch and show you how it actually works. The way the switch works is it has a metal insert, and this is the business part of the switch. And what it does is it completes a contact between this and the center part of the switch. And you can see that this concave convex actuator, when inserted in this housing, is touching the 2 contacts on either side, but is not touching the middle button. However, if I press down, we're on the wrong setting here. There we are. Now if I press down, I'm turning this switch on and off. And so it's by pressing this little button we have, which is accomplished using this actuator. We are actuating the switch. And this little button is held in place by, if I can get it in there properly, it's held in place by this little metal ring. And you can see that there's a path for dust to get in around either side of this metal ring. And when it does get in, it then needs to somehow get beneath this metal dome, and then it can begin to contaminate the contacts of the switch. So these contacts are either oxidizing spontaneously, or their degradation is being accelerated by debris like skin fragments and the like. And what that means is that the switches become increasingly temperamental. And just to give you an illustration of that, I'll walk through these switches here, pressing them each one by one. That one works. That one works. That one did not work. That one works. That one works. That one works. That one didn't. Didn't. So out of these various switches, we have a few that don't appear to function very well and would benefit from additional attention. And those are number 3, number 7, 11, 13, and 16. We know that the run-stop switch works now, and what's a little bit more difficult to verify is whether or not this function switch or the tap switch are working properly. So what can we do about this? Well, we can either wholesale replace all of the switches. We can attempt to replace only those that are not functioning properly, or we can attempt to clean them. And given the fact that if they're not working properly, I'm going to replace them anyway, I don't mind spending a little bit of time trying to clean them. And the way we clean them is simply squirting a couple of drops of contact cleaner on them and then actuating them repeatedly, and then rinsing out that contact cleaner with a bit of isopropanol, letting them dry, and repeat. So that's a kind of a time-consuming process, but nonetheless, if you don't have access to replacement switches, it might be the only thing that you can do if your switches are very temperamental. So I'll apply a couple of drops of cleaner to numbers 3, 7, 11, and 13. Well, 13 is obviously a bust, and 16. So we're going to be replacing 13 regardless. And I'll do the tap and the AB switch as well. And then simply work the switch. And keep working it, because if this doesn't work, we're replacing the switch. I'd rather not replace all of these switches. Not only is it a little bit of work, but I have other instruments that I'd like to use those parts on. And the switches themselves cost a little bit of money. They're about $1 each. So this switch seems to be working fine. So we can take that off our hit list. Well, as I'm waiting for the contact cleaner, and right now there's deoxit on some of these more reluctant intermittent switches, I'm looking into replacing this one, which had come apart during the removal of the switch cap. And I wanted to highlight something. This is a potential replacement switch that was purchased from a company called, and I love it because they're one of the few companies that continues to provide replacement parts for vintage synthesizers. So I don't want to be bad-mouthing them, but I do want to alert you to something, and that is that this switch, which is sold as a replacement switch for a TB303 or a TR606, is actually not an ideal replacement. And the reason why is that the actuator is actually much too small. This is the switch cap, and you can see it just falls right off. And the actuator on the original switch is about 3.75, 3 3/4 millimeters across, and it is square, roughly 3.75. And this one here on the switch is 3.26, so about 0.5 millimeter too small. This is another switch, a replacement switch, and you can see it's the correct size, 3.75 millimeters. Now, this switch, which doesn't fit, costs, I believe it's $2.95 from this switch, which is the correct switch, the replacement, which is catalog item or part number SKHCBEA010. It's an Alps tactile switch, and it not only resembles the original switch, but it has the same dimensions, and accordingly the switch cap is going to fit. This switch retails for approximately 80 cents. So between 1/3 to 1/4 the cost of the replacement switch, which is not a perfect fit. Whoa, stop the presses. Late breaking announcement. Much to my surprise, when I searched LCSC Electronics, they had the Alps Alpine switches that we're discussing in stock, and their price is as low as 13 cents each. So for the price of one switch from, you can replace all the switches in your 606. LCSC is associated with JLC PCB. I have no affiliation with JLC PCB. I'm not sponsored by them or anything of that sort, but I have used them in the past and been quite impressed by their service. The shipping from Asia is a little slower than Mauser or some of the other vendors that you might choose to use, but it's about on par with the shipping by. I do want to reiterate and reinforce my ongoing support of and companies like them that continue to support the vintage synthesizer and vintage audio equipment markets. That's not the business of an organization like LCSC. And you've got to imagine that in today's world, it's even harder for these unique boutique companies to continue to survive. So I will continue to support and patronize whenever I can. In this particular case, however, I just don't believe that they'll be my preferred vendor for this component. I don't know what you're supposed to do. Maybe keep your switch caps on with chewing gum or blue tack or something. I don't know. I wouldn't glue these on if I were you. But just a word of warning, if indeed you're attempting to acquire replacement parts from, this is not a particularly good fit. So I'm going to desolder this and replace it with a new switch and be right back. So this switch, I'm referring to it as 13, but actually it's position 13, switch 20. But I've just replaced it with the new switch and it's working fine. And we've cleaned all these switches. Let's see if they're working. So this is switch 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16. 15, 16, and 1. So they all appear to be working. The run stop switch is working. The A and B switch is working. There we go. It's a little twitchy. Maybe this one will benefit from a little more attention. So that's it for today's video. This 606 is working properly. It's the same 606 that is featured in the power supply rebuild video, also on my channel. I hope you found this interesting, educational, and useful. And again, please do continue to support and other companies like them that service the vintage instrument market. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.